Hello, students. Today we're going to read Bless Me Ultima by Rudolph Ayana. Today we're going to read Section 2. In my personal opinion, Section 2 is one of the best chapters that I ever read before in this book. So I definitely would recommend reading this book. It's a very great book. So let's get into Chapter 2. Ultima slips easily into the routine of daily life. The first day she put on her apron and helped my mother with breakfast. Later she swept the house and then helped my mother wash our clothes. In the old wash machine they pulled outside where it was cooler and it was under the young elm trees. It was as if she always had my mother's instinct and was very happy that she could talk to somebody that wasn't family. Deborah and Teresa were happy because Ultima did many of the household chores they normally did, and they had more time to spend in the attic and cut out an interminable train of paper dolls where they dressed, gave names to most of the miraculous things that they had made up there. My father was also pleased. Now he had one more person to tell his dream to. My father's dream was to gather his sons around him and move westward to land of the setting sun, to the vineyards of California. But the war had taken his 3 cents and made him bitter. He often got drunk on Saturday afternoons, and then he would rave against his old age. He would rave against the town on the opposite side of the river, which drained the man of his freedom, and he would cry because the war had ruined his dream. It was very sad to see my father cry, but I understood because sometimes a man has to cry, even if he is a man. And I was happy with Ultima. We walked together in the Llano and along the river banks to gather herbs and roots for her. She taught me the names of plants and flowers, of trees and bushes, of birds and animals. But most important, I learned from her that there was a beauty in time of the day and in time of the night, and that there was peace in the river and in the hills. She taught me to listen to the mysterious of the groaning earth and to feel complete in the fulfillment of its time. My soul grew under her careful guidance. I had been afraid of the awful presence of the river, which was the soul of the river, and thought her I learned that my spirit shared in the spirit of all things, but the innocent which our isolation shelter could not last forever. And the affairs of the town began to reach across the bridge and enter my life. Ultima's owl gave the warning that the time of peace on our hill was drawing to an end. It was Saturday night. My mother had laid out our clean clothes for Sunday Mass, and we'd gone to bed early because we always went to early Mass. The house was quiet and was in the midst of some dream that I have heard of the owl of warning. I was instantly looking through the small window at the dark figure that ran madly towards the house. He hurled himself at the door and began pounding. "Where are you?" he shouted. "Where are you? Where are you?" I was frightened, but I recognized the voice. It was Jason's father. "Un momento," I heard my father call. He fumbled with the tool that he had in his hand. I need help, Chavez cried pitifully. "Matan a la Hamarno." My father opened the door, and the frying man burst in. In the kitchen I heard my mother moan. Maria said, "I heard Chavez," and I heard his last words. And so we assumed that he was brought to here so he could deliver bad news. "Chavez, ¿qué pasa?" My father held the trembling man. Mi hermano," Chavez sobbed. "He was killed, my brother." My father looked and said, and pulled Chavez into the hall and helped him up the stairs. The light cast by the stairs revealed a wild, frightened eyes of Chavez. Gabriel! My mother cried and came forward, but my father pushed her back. He did not want her to see the monstrous mask of fear on the man's face. It is not our sons. It is something going on in the town. Get him some water. Get a hold of yourself, hombre. Tell me what has happened. My father shook Chavez, and the man's sobbing subsided. He took a glass of water and drank. Then he could talk. Ronaldo has just brought the news. My brother is dead. He signed and slumped against the wall. Chavez, brother was the sheriff of the town. The man would have fallen if my father had not helped him up. Chavez cried out. His father turned with concern in his face. Chavez's face corded with the thick veins. For the first time, his left arm came up, and I saw the rifle he had. Jesus, Maria, and Jose, my mother prayed. My mother groaned and slumped against the wall. Chavez regained part of his composure. Get your rifle. We must go to the bridge. The bridge? Ronaldo said. To meet him there. The crazy bastard has taken to the river. My father nodded silently. He went to the bedroom and returned his coat. While he loaded his rifle in the kitchen, Chavez related what he knew. My brother just got finished his rounds, he gasped. He was at the bus depot cafe, having coffee, sitting without a care in the world, and the bastard came up to where he sat, and without warning shot him in the head. His body shook as he retold the story. Perhaps it is better if you wait here, hombre, my father said with consolation. No, Chavez shouted. I must go. He was my brother, my father nodded. I saw him stand behind Chavez and put his arm around his shoulder. Now he was two-armed. I had only seen him shoot the rifle when he slaughtered pigs in the fall. Now they were going armed for a man. Gabriel, be careful, my mother called, as my father and Chavez slipped into the dark. See, I heard him answer. The screen door banged. Keep the doors locked. My mother went to the door and shut the latch. We never locked the doors, but tonight there was something strange and fearful in the air. Perhaps this is what drew me out into the night to follow my father and Chavez down the bridge, or perhaps it was some concern I had for my father. I don't know. I waited until my mother was in the house and dressed with slippers and was downstairs. I glanced down the hall and saw candlelight flickering from the room. The room was never entered unless they were Sunday visitors, or unless my mother took us into the prayers and rosaries for my brothers at war. I knew she was never kneeling at her altar. I knew she would only pray if she felt like her father was in danger, and would pray for her father's return. I slipped out of the kitchen door and into the night. It was cool. I sniffed the air. There was a tiny autumn to it. I ran up the goat path until I caught the sight of two shadowy figures ahead of me, Chavez and my father. We passed the dark house and went into a tall juniper tree that stood where the hill sloped down to the bridge. Even from a distance I could hear the commotion on the bridge. As we neared the bridge, I was afraid of being discovered. I had no reason for being there. My father would be very angry. To escape detection, I cut to the right and was swallowed up by the dark bushes of the river. I pushed through the dense bushes up into the bank of the river. From where I stood, and I could look up into the flooding beams of light that were pointed down by to excite them. I could hear them giving frenzied shouted instructions. I looked to my left where the bridge started and saw my father Chavez running towards the center of the bridge in excitement. My eyes were accustomed to the dark, but it was very glinty, and the light showed up in a clunk of bulrushes. The glint of light from the darkness was a pistol in his father's hands. I was frightened enough to come upon him so suddenly, but I dropped to my knees in fright. I must have uttered a cry because he turned and looked directly at me. At the same moment, a beam of light founded him and illuminated his face, twisted in with madness. I do not know if he saw me, or if the light cut off his vision, but I saw his bitter, contorted grin. As long as I live, I can never forget those wild eyes, like the eyes of a trapped savage animal. At the time, someone shouted from the bridge, "There!" Then all the lights found the crouched figure. He jumped and saw him as clear as if it were daylight. "Hey!" he screamed in a bloody, curdling cry that echoed down the river. The man on the bridge didn't know what to do. They stood transfixed, looking down at the madman waving the pistol in the air. "Hey!" he cried again. It was a cry of rage and pain, and it made me feel sick to my soul. The cry of torment that the man went through, and the peaceful greenery mystery of the river, and the great presence of the river watched from the shadows and the deep recesses. As I watched from there, I crouched at the riverbank. "Japanese ora! Japanese ora!" he cried. I am wounded. Come help me," he called to the man on the bridge. The rising mist of the river swirled in the beams of spotlights. It was like a horrible nightmare. Suddenly he leaped up and ran splashing through the water towards me. The lights followed him. He grew bigger. I heard him panting. The water his feet kicked up splashed on my face, and I thought he would run over me. Then he suddenly had sprinted in my direction, and he turned and disappeared into the darkness into the left side of the riverbank. The lights moved in all directions, but then they couldn't find him. Some of the lights swept over me, and I trembled with fear as I would be found out, or worse, I would be mistaken and be shot by my own father. "The crazy bastard got away," somebody shouted on the bridge. "Hey!" the scream sounded again. It was a cry that I did not understand, and I am sure the men on the bridge didn't either. The man they hunted had slipped away from human understanding. He had become a wild animal, and they were afraid. Damn! I heard them cursing to themselves. Then a car with a siren and flashing red lights came to the bridge. It was a vigil, the state's policeman who patrolled our town. "Chavez is dead," I heard him shout. "He never had a chance. His brain's blown out." There was silence. "We had to kill him," Jason's father shouted. His voice was full of anger, rage, and desperation. "I have deputized you," Vigil said. "The hell with deputizing," Chavez shouted. "He killed my brother. Esto loco. The men agreed in silence. "You have spotted him?" Vigil said. "Just now we saw him, but we lost him." "He's down there," someone answered. He is an animal. He has been shot," Chavez cried out. "See," the men agreed. "Now, wait a moment. It was my father who spoke. I don't know what he said because of the shouting. I mean, what could they know because he was in the dark? I finally saw him, though. He was about 46 feet away, crouched in the reeds as before. The muddy waters of the river lapped and gurgled savagely around him. Before the night had begun, there was a cool and frigid wave in the air, and I shivered. I was torn between fear and made my body tremble, and a desire to help the poor man. But I could not move. I could only watch him like a chained spectator. I could only watch him like a helpless person. I could only watch him and feel guilty inside. I knew that he was going to die pretty soon. And I felt sorry for him because I felt like he was drunk and did this out of no sense, no conscience, and for no reason. If they only talked to him, they'll realize why he did it. I think because he was drunk, that was the reason why he had done this to Chavez's brother. He let us act like men. That is not an animal down there. That man is Lupito. You all know Lupito. You know that the war made him sick, but the men would not listen to him. I guess it was because he was the town drunk and that he said nothing useful at all. Go back to drinking and leave this job to men, one of the men jeered at him. He killed the sheriff in cold blood, another added. I knew that the sheriff had been greatly admired. I am not drinking, Narco persisted. It is you men who are drunk of blood. You have lost your reason. Reason, Chavez countered. The reason did he have for killing my brother? You know, he addressed the men. My brother did no one harm. Tonight a mad animal cried behind him and took his life. You call that reason? The animal has to be destroyed. See, the men shouted in unison. At least let us try to talk to him, Nardisto begged. I knew that it was hard for him, and hard for a man to beg. Yes, Virgo added, perhaps he will give himself up. Do you think he'll listen to talk? Chavez jumped forward. He's down there, and he still has his pistol that killed my brother. Go down and talk to him. I see Chavez shouting in Virgil's face. Virgil said nothing. Chavez laughed. This is only talk he will understand. He turned and fired over the railing of the bridge. His shouts roared, then whined away down the river. I could hear the bullets make splashing noises in the water. Wait! Narisco shouted. He took Chavez's rifle with one hand and held it up. Chavez struggled against him, but Narisco was too big and strong. I will talk to him, Narisco said. He pushed Chavez back. I understand your sorrow, Chavez, he said, but one killing is enough for tonight. The men must have been impressed by the sincerity. They stood back and waited. Narisco leaned over the concrete railing and shouted down into the darkness. Hey, Lupito, it is me, Narisco. It is me, Hombre, your compadre. Listen, my friend. A very bad business has happened tonight, and if we act like men, we can settle it. Let me come down and talk to you, Lupito. Let me help you. I looked at Lupito. He had been watching the action on the bridge, but now, as Narisco talked to him, I saw his head slump out of his chest. He seemed to be thinking. I prayed that he would listen to Narisco, and that the anger and frustrated men on the bridge would not commit mortal sin. The night was very quiet. The men on the bridge awaited an answer. Only the lapping water of the river made a sound. Amigo, Narisco shouted. You know I am your friend. I want to help you, hombre. He laughed softly. Hey, Lupito, you remember just a few years ago before we went to war? You remember the first time you came into the 8-ball to gamble a little? Remember how I taught you how Juan Botas marked the aces with the little tobacco juice, and he taught you where the green is and how to beat him? He laughed again. Those were good times, Lupito, before the war came. Now we have this bad business to settle, but we are friends who will help you. I saw Lupito's tense body shake. A low, sad, mournful cry torn itself from his throat and mixed into a lapping sound of the waters of the river. His head shook slowly, and I guess he must have been thinking and fighting between surrendering or remaining free and hunted. Then, like a cold spring, he jumped up, his pistol aimed straight up. There was a flash of fire and the loud report of the pistol. But he had not fired at Nisco or any other of the men on the bridge. The spotlights found him. There's your answer, Chavez shouted. He's firing, another voice shouted. He's crazy. Lupito's pistol sounded again. Still, he was not aiming at the men on the bridge. He was shooting to draw off their fire. Shoot, shoot, someone on the bridge called. No, I whispered through clenched lips. But it was no later than the men were already decided, and the men started responding by aiming the rifles over the side of the bridge. One single shot sounded, then a barrage followed it like a roar of a cannon, like the rumble of thunder in the summer thunderstorm. My shots found their mark. I said, I saw Lupito lift his feet and hurled backwards by the bullets. He was shot, but he got up and ran limping, crying towards the bank where I laid. Bless me, I thought he cried, and a second volley of shots from the bridge sounded. But this time they sounded like a great whirling of wings, like pigeons swirling to the roost on top of a church hill. He fell forward and crawled out of the holy water into the river before me and in front of me. I wanted to reach out and help him, but I was frozen by my fear. He looked up at me, and his face was bathed in water and flowing with hot blood. But he was also dark and peaceful and slumped into the sand of the riverbank. He made a strange gurgling sound in his throat when he was still. Upon the bridge, a great shout went up. The men were already running to the end of the bridge to come down and claim the man was dead. Hands dug into the soft, wet sand in front of me. I turned and ran to the shadows of the river, enveloped me, and I raced for safety at home. Branches whipped at my face, and vines and tree trunks and at my feet had tripped me. In my headlong rush, I disturbed sleeping birds and their shrills and cries and slapping wings in my face. The horror of darkness had never been so complete as if it were that night. I had started praying to myself from the moment I had heard first shots, and I had never stopped praying until I reached home. Over and over my mind ran with words of active contortion. I had never been so fearful in my life. The first Holy Communion my mother had taught me, the act of sin. It was to be said after one made his confession to the priest and the last prayer before death. Did God listen? Would he hear? He had seen my father on the bridge, and where was Lupito's soul winging to? Or was it washing down the river to the fertile lands of my uncle's farm? A priest who had saved Lupito, or would he have not, because he had killed Chavez's brother? Or why did my mother dream for me to be a priest? Or would I ever wash away the stain of blood from the sweet waters of the river? I think at the time I began to cry because I felt the river brushed my head up against the hills, and I heard shots, and that had made me sob for the first time. It was also then that I heard the owl. Between my gasps for air and my sobs, I saw and listened for its song. My heart was pounding and my lungs hurt, but the calmness had never over the moonlight and had never come over Ultima's hooting owl. I stood still for a long time. I realized that the owl had been with me throughout the night. I had watched over all that had happened on the bridge. Suddenly a terrible dark feeling that had possessed me was gone. I looked at the house that my father and my brothers had built on the Jupiter Patch Hill. I was quiet and peaceful in the blue night. The sky sparkled with millions of stars and the virgin horned moon, the moon of my mother's people, the moon of the Lunas. My mother would be praying for the soul of Lupito. Again the owl sang. Ultima's spirit bathed me with this strong resolution. I turned and looked across the river. Some lights shone in the town. In the moonlight I could make out the tower of the church, the schoolhouse top, and was beyond the glistening of the town's water tank. I heard the soft wail of a siren, and I knew the men would be pulling Lupito from the river. The river's brown waters to be stained with blood forever and ever and ever. In the autumn I would have to go to school in the town, and in a few years I'll be going for lessons in the church. I had shivered. My body began to hurt from the beating it had taken from the bushes in the river. But the hurt was more than I had witnessed for the first time. The real hurt that I felt was from the death of a man. My father did not like the town nor its ways. When we had to first move from La Pastras, we had moved in a rented house in the town. But every Every evening after work, he looked across the river and the barren empty hills, and finally he had brought a couple of acres and began building our house. He told everybody that it was crazy and that the rocky, wild hill could not sustain any life. And my mother was more than upset. She wanted to buy along the river where the land was fertile and where there was water for plants and trees. But my father won the fight to be close to his llano, because truthfully, our hill was the beginning of the llano. From here it stretched as far as the eye could see, to Las Pastores and beyond. The men of the town had murdered Lupito, but he had murdered the sheriff. There said the war had made him crazy. The prayers for Lupito mixed into prayers for my brother. So many different thoughts raced through my mind that I had felt dizzy and very weak and sick. I ran the last of my way and slipped quietly into the house. Hello you guys, today we read chapter 2. Next week we're going to read chapter 3. Hope next week you can join us, because when we read chapter 3 it's going to be a really good chapter. It's personally the best chapter I love out of all of the book. And I hope to see you guys next week.